At Christmas dinner, my older brother stood up and announced that from now on I was no longer part of this family. My name is Kayla Mitchell. I'm 35, and that night was supposed to be just another holiday gathering at my parents' house in the Cedar Park suburbs outside Austin. Everyone went quiet the moment the words left his mouth. Forks stopped halfway to plates. The Christmas lights on the tree kept blinking, but the room felt frozen. My parents nodded slowly like this had been discussed long before I arrived. My sister-in-law gave a tight little smile. Even my uncle and cousin stayed silent, eyes on their food. Then my brother leaned in close, his voice low enough that only I could hear, and whispered with a smirk, "Everything you've put in now belongs to me. Ha ha ha." My fists clenched under the table so hard my knuckles hurt. The ham, the pies, the laughter from earlier, it all turned sour in seconds. I didn't say a word. Not one. I just pushed my chair back, stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked out without looking at anyone. Outside, the night air was mild, typical Austin December lights strung across the neighborhood roofs glowing in the distance. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove straight home to my apartment downtown. As soon as I pulled into the garage, I picked up my phone and called my lawyer, Mr. Ford. 2 days later, they found out everything was legally in my name, and they had no claim to any of it. If you've ever dealt with family who only see you as a bank account, drop your story in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happened next, because trust me, it gets worse for them, and a whole lot better for me. On the drive home that Christmas night, passing through the streets of Austin still lit up with holiday lights, my mind started wandering back to how I'd ended up here. I graduated college about 10 years earlier with a degree in computer science and landed a solid job as an IT manager at a mid-sized tech firm right here in the city. The pay was good, steady enough that I could live comfortably in a downtown apartment, save a decent amount each month, and not worry about much. I've stayed single, no kids, just focused on my career, and the occasional weekend hiking trip around the hill country. From pretty early on, my family saw that stability as an open invitation. It started small. My older brother, Justin Mitchell, 39, would call out of the blue, asking to borrow a few $100s for something urgent, a car repair, an unexpected bill, or just to tide him over until his next landscaping contract came through. I'd send the money without hesitation because, well, he was my brother, and I figured that's what you do. Mom and Dad began doing the same not long after. Dad's back started acting up, and the medical bills piled up faster than their retirement savings could cover. Mom would phone and say the house needed a new roof, or the AC unit died in the middle of a Texas summer. Each time I'd transfer what they needed, telling myself it was only right to help the people who raised me. Then there were the bigger asks. Justin and his wife, Brooke Mitchell, wanted to expand their small landscaping business a few years back, buy a couple of new trucks and some equipment. They didn't qualify for the full loan on their own, so they asked if I'd cover the down payment. $30,000 felt huge at the time, but I wrote the check anyway, thinking it would pay off for all of us in the long run. Over the years, those requests became routine. A credit card balance here, a vacation they couldn't quite afford there, tuition help for my niece Riley when preschool costs jumped. I kept saying yes because I genuinely believed family sticks together through thick and thin. I didn't have a spouse or children pulling at my time and money, so in my mind it made sense that I could step up when they needed it. But looking back on that drive, I started realizing how one-sided it had always been. No one ever offered to pay me back, not even in installments. There were no real thank yous beyond a quick text or a casual mention at the next family gathering. Instead, I'd hear little comments slipped into conversations how lucky I was to have so much disposable income, how easy my life must be without kids to worry about, how reliable I'd become whenever something came up. Those remarks stung more than I admitted to myself back then. I'd brush them off, tell myself they didn't mean anything, that I was just being sensitive. Deep down, though, they planted this quiet ache, the feeling that my worth to them was tied almost entirely to what I could provide. I loved them, I really did, and I wanted to believe my help came from a good place, not obligation. Yet the more I thought about it that night, the clearer it became that I'd spent a decade building a safety net for everyone else, while barely noticing how little they'd done to support me in return. No one asked how my job was going when promotions came or stress piled up. No one checked in just to talk without some need attached. It was always about the next favor, the next transfer. By the time I pulled into my parking garage, that realization sat heavy in my chest, not full anger yet, but a deep, tired sadness mixed with the first sparks of resentment. I'd given so much of myself thinking it proved I was a good daughter, a good sister. Instead, it felt like I'd trained them to expect it to count on it, without ever seeing me as anything more. The first really big one came when Justin had just finished college. He'd switched majors a couple times and racked up more student debt than he expected. My parents, Gary and Linda Mitchell, couldn't cover the remaining balance on their own after helping with what they could, so they turned to me, $40,000 to clear it all and give him a clean start. I took on a side consulting gig for months to make it happen, cutting back on everything extra in my own life. When the final payment went through and he told me how relieved he felt, that weight lifting off his shoulders, I felt proud, like I'd done something meaningful for the brother who'd always been the center of attention growing up. A few years later, the house situation started getting serious. Interest rates spiked, and Dad's part-time work after retirement wasn't stretching far enough. The bank sent warnings about missed payments, talking foreclosure if things didn't turn around. Mom called one evening, voice shaking, explaining how close they were to losing the place they'd lived in for decades. I stepped in, refinancing the mortgage under better terms using my credit, which was stronger thanks to steady income and no big debts of my own. That first refinance meant I put in close to $30,000 up front to bring the principal down and qualify for the lower rate. They signed the papers gratefully, assuring me it was just temporary until things stabilized. But it didn't stop there. A couple years after that, another rate hike hit, and medical bills from Dad's ongoing treatments added pressure. We refinanced again, this time me covering another $25,000 to avoid penalties and keep the payments manageable. Then came the big repair after a bad storm roof damage the insurance wouldn't fully cover. I added another $25,000, bringing the total I'd poured into the house to around $80,000 over several rounds. Each time, my parents signed quitclaim deeds, transferring portions of ownership gradually into my name so the bank would approve the new loans based on my finances. They trusted me completely to handle the paperwork, never questioning the details, because my credit made everything smoother and saved them from higher interest or losing the home altogether. Around the same period, the family landscaping business took a hit. Seasonal work dried up during a slow economy, and Justin struggled to keep crews paid while waiting for spring contracts. He and Brooke came to me with a plan to buy better equipment that would let them bid on larger jobs. $30,000 for a down payment on new mowers and trucks. I saw how stressed he looked, how the business my parents had helped start years earlier was at risk. So I transferred the money, telling myself it was an investment in something that supported all of them, jobs for Justin, pride for Dad, who still consulted occasionally, stability for everyone. Through all this, though, the little comments started adding up in ways I tried to ignore. At family barbecues, someone would joke about how I could afford nice vacations alone because I didn't have a family dragging me down, or how lucky I was to splash out on a new car without consulting anyone else. Brooke once laughed and said something about me having money to burn since no kids were eating it up. Even Mom, after thanking me for another house payment, added that it must be nice not having real responsibilities like raising a grandchild. The one that hurt deepest came from Dad during a quiet moment after signing yet another deed. He patted my hand and said, "Daughters don't usually need much inheritance anyway, since we marry into other families. It was offhand, almost kind in his mind, but it landed like a confirmation that everything I'd done was expected precisely because I was the unmarried one, the one without a real claim on the future. I'd lie awake some nights wondering why those words bothered me so much when the help itself still felt right. Part of me clung to the idea that love meant showing up this way, no strings attached. Another part quieter than whispered that maybe the strings were all on my side, pulling tighter while they stayed loose on theirs. The pride I'd felt early on slowly mixed with something heavier, a sense that my generosity was being counted on, not cherished. Still, I kept going because stopping would mean admitting the imbalance out loud, and I wasn't ready for what that might cost. 2 days after Christmas, a thick envelope from the law office arrived at my parents' house with a certified copy sent directly to Justin. I was sitting in my apartment trying to catch up on work emails after the holiday break when my phone started blowing up. Mr. Ford had warned me the day before that the official documents would reach them that morning, complete with a detailed cover letter from him. The letter laid everything out plainly through the series of refinances and voluntary quitclaim deeds that everyone had signed over the years. The suburban house in Cedar Park, the majority shares in the family landscaping company, and the linked savings accounts were now legally titled in my name alone, with no valid grounds for challenge. Every signature was dated notarized and given freely at times when they desperately needed the financial help to keep things afloat. The first call came from Justin only minutes after the mail was delivered. He rang repeatedly until I finally picked up, and his voice exploded through the speaker loud enough that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. He accused me of betraying the entire family, claiming I'd hidden my true intentions behind all the paperwork, and swore he'd hire the best attorney in Austin to sue me and take back what was rightfully his as the eldest son. I stayed calm, letting him vent, and only said that everything was fully legal, and he was welcome to have any lawyer review it. He hung up abruptly after repeating that I'd regret this. Less than an hour later, Mom called. She was crying from the moment I answered, her voice breaking as she asked how I could do this to the people who raised me. She described sitting in the living room, staring at the papers, hands shaking, unable to believe her own daughter would turn against them over money. She talked about how Dad's health had taken a turn because of the stress, how no one in the house had slept, and begged me to reconsider for the sake of blood ties. Her sobs grew louder when she brought up Riley, saying the little girl would grow up confused about why her aunt had abandoned everyone. Dad didn't call. Instead, he sent a long string of text messages, one after another. He wrote that he'd read every page and felt deeply betrayed, that he'd once been proud of me, but now only felt shame. He reminded me of the hard work he'd put in to provide for us growing up, the sacrifices he'd made, so I could go to college debt-free, and said this proved I had no conscience left. His final message was blunt. Unless I reversed everything immediately, he would act as if he no longer had a daughter. Throughout the day, the phone kept going. Brooke sent several cold messages asking if I'd thought about Riley's future without her grandparents home. Keith left a stern voicemail saying I should be ashamed for hurting my own brother this way. Even Whitney texted privately, sounding shocked and disappointed, asking if there was any chance we could talk it out in person. I sat there in the quiet of my apartment watching the screen light up over and over, feeling like the weight of their anger was crashing down all at once. Anger rose in me at being called a liar when everything had been transparent heartbreak, at hearing Mom cry and picturing Dad silent in his chair, and a hollow emptiness realizing none of them mentioned what I'd given up over the years. No one asked how I felt after Christmas night. No one acknowledged how my help had kept them from losing everything multiple times. It was only blame and demands. I decided not to respond directly anymore. I called Mr. Ford instead and asked him to send a formal reply on my behalf, reiterating the legality and suggesting they seek independent legal advice. He agreed without hesitation, his steady voice reminding me there was no real basis for any claim against me. By evening, as Austin's streets glowed with lingering holiday lights, I turned the phone to silent. For the first time in years, a real quiet settled in, not avoidance, but the kind that comes from finally holding a boundary. The pain was still sharp and raw, but mixed with it was a small growing sense of relief, like I'd finally set down a load I'd carried far too long without anyone noticing. The weeks that followed saw their attempts to reach me grow more frequent and more desperate in ways I hadn't quite expected. It started with a group text thread they created, pulling in both Keith and Whitney to make it feel like a united front. Justin was usually the one leading, sending long messages about how his lawyer had reviewed everything and felt confident there was a strong case for fraud or undue influence if we went to court. He'd throw in vague references to Texas property laws, as if quoting them would scare me into backing down. I read them all without replying, forwarding screenshots to Mr. Ford, so he'd have a record if things escalated. Mom switched to handwritten letters, carefully addressed envelopes showing up in my mailbox every 10 days or so. She filled pages with memories from when I was little, running around the backyard in Cedar Park family beach trips during my high school years, before easing into pleas for a face-to-face talk so we could work it out like a real family. She wrote about losing sleep, about praying every night that I'd soften. Each letter ended with the same line she used to sign my childhood birthday cards. "Love you forever, Mom." Holding those pages made my hands tremble a bit, old guilt flaring up sharp and familiar, but I set them aside unanswered. Brooke took a different approach, sending photos of Riley to my phone every few days. One showed her grinning in front of the half-taken-down Christmas tree, another holding a crayon drawing of stick figures, labeled with all our names, and Miss Aunt Kayla scrawled at the bottom. The messages were always short. "She misses you so much," or "Riley keeps asking when you're coming over." Looking at those pictures twisted something deep inside me. Riley was completely innocent in all this, and I missed her giggles, the way she'd cling to my leg whenever I visited. But I recognized the tactic for what it was, and I saved the images to a private folder without responding. Dad communicated less often, but always through lengthy emails. He described how his health had worsened, how he'd needed new medication because his blood pressure spiked after the shock. He mentioned talking to old friends who'd worked in law, and how they agreed my actions were morally wrong, even if technically legal. Every email closed with the same gentle pressure: do the right thing before it's too late. Whitney and Keith took turns texting privately, their tones softer, almost like mediators. Whitney asked if I'd be open to grabbing coffee, just the two of us, so she could share how everyone else was feeling. Keith sent Bible verses about forgiveness, adding notes about how family is a gift from God that shouldn't be thrown away. I stuck to my decision to route everything through Mr. Ford. He sent brief professional responses when necessary, restating the legal facts and suggesting they stop direct contact to avoid anything that could be seen as harassment. Over time, I blocked Justin's and Brooke's numbers to cut down on the constant notifications, though I left Mom's and Dad's open because some part of me wasn't ready to close that door completely. Those weeks wore on me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Each new message dragged me back into the emotional churn, anger at the manipulation, sadness over losing the family I'd always hoped for, and a growing loneliness when I realized no one ever asked how I was holding up through any of this. I started taking longer evening walks around downtown Austin, headphones in, letting music drown out the looping thoughts. Work became my anchor, a place where I could focus without the past pulling at me. But as the weeks turned into a month, my resolve strengthened. I saw the pattern clearly now: anger when that didn't work, shifting to pleading. Pleading ignored, circling back to blame. There was never a real apology, never an acknowledgement of everything I'd given over the years. It was only effort after effort to drag me back into the old role, the reliable one who always said yes. By the end of that stretch, a subtle lightness started creeping in, even as the ache lingered. I slept better, no longer jolting awake at late-night buzzes. The loneliness was still there, but it felt different, less frightening, more like space I could finally fill on my own terms. A few months later, the real consequences started hitting them in ways that were hard to ignore. The family landscaping company took a serious blow when the local economy slowed down more than usual. Several big contracts that Justin had counted on for the spring season fell through as clients tightened budgets and delayed projects. Without any backup funds to bridge the gap, he had to let go of most of the crew, keeping only a couple of part-time workers to handle the smaller jobs that trickled in. Salaries for those who stayed were cut, and the new equipment they'd invested in years earlier sat idle in the yard more often than not. The bank didn't waste time either. Official notices about the mortgage on the Cedar Park house arrived, pointing out the missed payments and giving a deadline to catch up or face foreclosure proceedings. Mom and Dad now had to stretch their fixed retirement income in ways they hadn't needed to before skipping routine maintenance on the property and cutting back on things like dining out or small gifts for Riley. Brooke and Justin felt the strain most in their day-to-day life. They put off any non-essential spending from new clothes for Riley to weekend outings they used to enjoy as a family. Arguments over money became more frequent, the kind that lingered in the air even after the words stopped. Brooke took on extra shifts where she could, but it still wasn't enough to restore the cushion they'd once had. Keith, who'd relied on occasional side work from the company, found himself with even fewer hours. He scaled back his usual hobbies like weekend fishing trips that required gas and gear sticking closer to home most days. Whitney reached out one evening with a message that stood out from everything else I'd received. She wrote that she'd been thinking a lot about what had happened and finally understood how much I'd put in over the years. "I had no idea you'd given so much," she said, adding that she was sorry for staying silent that Christmas night and going along with everyone else. Reading it gave me pause, a mix of validation that someone finally saw it and sadness that the acknowledgement came only after everything had changed. Meanwhile, I wrapped up the last loose ends on the legal side. Mr. Ford handled the final transfers for any remaining linked accounts and updated the company shares, officially making sure no financial ties could pull me back in unexpectedly. It felt like closing a chapter for good, one that left me with a clearer sense of control over my own future. During those months, I turned my focus inward in ways I hadn't before. I signed up for evening yoga classes at a studio near my apartment, finding that the slow movements and deep breathing helped quiet the lingering noise in my head. I made time for longer walks along Ladybird Lake, watching the water and letting thoughts come and go without forcing them away. Friends from work became a bigger part of my routine. We'd grab tacos after hours or catch a movie on weekends, conversations flowing easily without any underlying requests attached. For the first time, I planned short getaways just for myself, a quiet drive to the hill country to hike trails I'd always meant to try, or a solo day exploring San Antonio's quieter spots. Guilt still surfaced now and then, especially when I pictured Riley navigating a tighter budget or Mom and Dad adjusting to a simpler life in their older years. But I reminded myself that these outcomes weren't punishments I'd imposed. They were the natural result of choices made long before I drew the line. My boundary hadn't created their struggles. It had simply stopped me from delaying them indefinitely. Slowly, a deeper peace settled in. Mornings felt lighter, evenings more restful, and I started dreaming bigger about what came next. Maybe buying my own place someday, or pushing for that next career step I'd put on hold. Their difficulties hurt to witness from a distance, yet they also affirmed that standing firm had been necessary, not cruel. It opened space for a life that finally felt like my own. After completely cutting ties, I decided to make a bigger change that I'd always put off because part of me worried they might need me at any moment. I accepted a new position at a larger tech company in Houston, one with more responsibility and a salary that gave me real breathing room. The offer came after a few virtual interviews, and saying yes felt like the right step toward a fresh start, away from everything familiar in Austin. The short flight from Austin Bergstrom took less than an hour, and I landed in Houston with just 2 suitcases and a few boxes of personal things ready to build something new. I rented a more comfortable apartment in Midtown, the kind with high ceilings, plenty of natural light, and a small balcony overlooking tree-lined streets. Setting it up over the first few weeks kept me busy in the best way, picking out furniture that actually suited my taste, adding plants to the corners and hanging art I'd collected but never displayed before. For the first time, the space felt entirely mine without any compromises for visitors who might drop by unannounced. On weekends, I joined a local running group that met along Buffalo Bayou. The early morning runs with a mix of friendly strangers turned into easy conversations about favorite routes or upcoming races, and it gave me a sense of routine that wasn't tied to family obligations. No more late-night calls pulling me out of sleep. My evenings stayed quiet, and I woke up rested in a way I hadn't in years. I started going out for tacos with coworkers after work, trying new spots around the city that locals raved about, places with handmade tortillas and salsas that actually had kick. Those casual dinners filled with laughter and stories about projects or weekend plans reminded me how light connection could feel when it wasn't loaded with expectations. I reconnected with a couple of old college friends who lived nearby, hosting simple dinners at my place, where we cooked together and talked late into the night. No one asked for favors or brought up money troubles. The conversation stayed on books we were reading, shows we binged, or dreams we'd shelved for too long. I finally had time for things I'd always meant to do. I signed up for a weekend cooking class focused on Texas barbecue, spending hours learning to smoke brisket properly and coming home smelling like oak wood and satisfied. Evenings on the balcony with a book or podcast became my favorite way to unwind, the city sounds below, blending into background noise that felt comforting rather than intrusive. Work itself brought fresh challenges I could dive into fully. The team was supportive, the projects meaningful, and I earned recognition for ideas I contributed without second-guessing whether I should be available for someone else instead. That professional momentum built confidence I hadn't realized I'd lost along the way. Occasional thoughts of Riley still surfaced, wondering how she was adjusting or what stories she heard about me. Mom and Dad crossed my mind too, imagining quieter days in the old house. Those moments carried a soft sadness, but they no longer overwhelmed me. I'd given more than enough chances over the years, and peace came from accepting that change had to start with me. This new life wasn't flawless, but it was honest and mine. I began saving seriously for goals that excited me: a down payment on my own place, someday travel to places I'd only seen in photos. For the first time in a long time, waking up each day carried possibility instead of duty. The freedom to choose how I spent my time, who I spent it with, and what I built next, that was the real gift I'd given myself. 1 year later, looking back at everything, I can say with complete certainty that I have no regrets. The family is still facing the same ongoing struggles, and from what little I hear, nothing fundamental has changed in how they handle things. The landscaping company has been scaled down to almost nothing more than Justin running it solo most days, with only occasional day laborers for the few jobs that come in. He and Brooke have seriously discussed selling off some of the bigger equipment just to cut costs and bring in a little cash, even talking about Justin looking for a steady office job to replace the uncertainty. They've had to let go of a lot of the small comforts they used to take for granted. No more family trips, fewer new things for Riley, and tighter budgets all around. There's no indication they've reflected on their behavior or taken any real accountability. The story they tell themselves, at least from the rare updates that reach me, is still that I walked away and left them to fend for themselves. Mom has sent a few more handwritten letters over the months, each one in her familiar, neat handwriting that I'd recognize anywhere. I keep them unopened in a drawer set aside for that purpose. It isn't out of lingering anger anymore. It's simply because I know opening them would only pull me back into the same cycle of memories designed to make me feel responsible again. I've made my peace with not needing to read those words. I still think about Riley a lot, wondering how she's doing, and hoping she's finding ways to feel secure despite the changes around her. Maybe one day when she's older and can understand things on her own terms, there'll be space for us to reconnect without all the old baggage. For now, I trust that protecting my own well-being is the best way I can eventually show up for her, if that chance ever comes. My life in Houston has become exactly what I needed it to be. Work has rewarded the focus I've been able to give it. I've taken on bigger projects, earned promotions that feel earned, and found real satisfaction in mentoring newer team members the way good leaders once did for me. I bought my first home, a cozy townhouse with a small backyard where I grow herbs and flowers that bloom brighter each season. Evenings spent out there with a book, or just listening to the city settle, feel like the deepest kind of calm I've ever known. I have friends now who know the whole story and stay anyway, people I can call for no reason other than to share a laugh or a meal. We take short road trips, host simple gatherings, and build memories that don't come with hidden costs. Everything feels balanced, reciprocal, and genuinely nourishing. The clearest lesson, and the one I hope resonates with anyone hearing this, is that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's essential for protecting yourself. Family isn't automatically entitled to endless one-sided sacrifice, and love shouldn't require you to shrink or disappear to maintain it. True peace doesn't come from holding on at all costs. It comes from choosing to live fully for yourself and surrounding yourself with people who value you as you are. Their ongoing difficulties aren't something I caused. They're the natural outcome of patterns that went unaddressed for years. Facing those consequences might one day push them toward real growth, but that's no longer my responsibility to force or fix. Thank you all for listening to my story all the way to the end. I truly appreciate every one of you who stayed through it, because sharing something this personal isn't easy. If anything here touched you or reminded you of your own experiences, please share your thoughts in the comments. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Thank you again from the bottom of my heart.